Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and today I am doing the second half of my December reading wrap-up, which is only about 7 things. I thought I would read a ton more over Christmas, but I was traveling, I was doing a lot of social stuff with family. I didn't read that much. But I still have things to talk about, so let's get straight into it. I'm going to start with the comics I read first because they are the ones I have the least to say about, though they were all quite good. So I read Runaways Volume 2, Best Friends Forever, which is written by Rowell. The artwork in this one is by Chris Anka and somebody else whose name I can't remember right now. So this is the second volume of the Runaways series being written by Rowell, which directly continues on the series written by Brian K. Vaughan about 10 years ago, I think. So I really enjoyed this second one. Kind of the gang has been brought back together, but they're still deciding, like, what are they going to be doing? What is their purpose? How are they going to work as superheroes or whatever? And I think that the final person from their group, who I'd completely forgotten about, shows up again on the very last page of this volume, and I was like, you know, I think maybe I've forgotten more than I realized from the series I read years ago, so I really need to go reread the Brian K. Vaughan series. But I really liked it. I feel like it is written very well. The characters seem very consistent and I really adore the cast of this series. It's one of the few Marvel storylines and characters that I really care about and that I feel attached to. Like, I don't need to know that much about the broader Marvel universe to appreciate their stories and their characters and everything. So I will definitely be continuing on with this, and while I'm waiting for Volume 3 to come out, I should probably go reread the ones by Vaughan because the library has them. For Christmas, I got the latest 2 Lumberjanes volumes, so I read Volume 9, On a Roll, and Volume 10, Parents' Day. Volume 9 I didn't love that much. This one is about a roller derby match to win back the Yeti's treehouse from the Sasquatches, which have taken up residence in this. So the girls at the summer camp are trying to help the Yetis get their home back. I really like the Yetis, I really like the Sasquatches, that was hilarious, but I do not like roller derby, and this whole thing is about roller derby. I did not care about that at all. So, you know, it was still a very Lumberjane story. It just wasn't something that interested me, so this one was just okay. But Volume 10, Parents' Day, this one I really enjoyed. It's the first ever Parents' Day at this summer camp for hardcore lady types. And so all of the parents of the characters show up. Most of them have been shown or mentioned before, but this time they're all there. And of course all the girls are trying to keep them from discovering the supernatural, bizarre stuff that happens at camp. So yeah, it was really, really good, and I really enjoyed a lot of the parents' characters. It also helped fill in more about these girls' families and some of their backstories, like their lives outside of the summer camp, and I really liked that. At this point, I'm just really enjoying the Lumberjanes comic, but I'm not sure where it's going to go. Time runs more slowly at the camp, so this series could go on very indefinitely with just an endless series of adventures, but I really hope that the creators have some sort of end game in mind, like have plotted out some of the story arcs and have an end, a conclusion to the series planned, because I much prefer comic series that are like that rather than being endlessly open-ended. I want a conclusion. I can't collect them for forever. Collecting trade comics is very expensive sometimes, but I will keep reading them. They are just so much fun. And now for something completely different, I read Iain M. Banks by Paul Kincaid. This is one of the modern Masters of Science Fiction books put out by the University of Illinois Press. I read one of these before, the one by Jerry Canavan on Octavia E. Butler. I think I read that 2 years ago, back in 2016, and it was really good. So I ended up picking up this most recent one on Banks. It was nominated in the Best Related Work category in the Hugo Awards this year. It didn't win, but it was nominated. And of course I've been very interested in Banks's work and more about him as a person, and not just his science fiction work, but also what his mainstream, like more literary novels were like. And this was exactly what I needed, exactly what I expected to. So it's basically a biographical, chronological, academic analysis of like his life and all the books that he wrote. And so it puts his mainstream novels right up against his science fiction novels as they were written and published at the same time and things like that. And it really analyzes the themes, the recurring like elements across a lot of his books and where those came from and things. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well written. It is definitely more academic, but it is incredibly readable. I thought it was just really well done. So I would definitely recommend this if you were interested in Banks as a person, as an author. I think that this whole Modern Masters of Science Fiction series is something I'm really going to dive more into. I've ordered the one on Bujoled. There is one on Bujoled. The only thing I would caution people about is that while it's a great read, these books spoil the author's works. Not like in great depth, but they're going to talk about the twist endings and give full plot synopses and stuff. I'm not really sensitive to those kinds of spoilers. I know I'm going to forget most of that before I even get to reading some of the novels, but if you are sensitive to spoilers, I wouldn't read any of these until maybe you've actually read the author's entire body of work. So my 2 cents there, but this was really good. Next up, I finished Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft, which is the first book in what I think is a projected quartet. I want to say the first 3 books are out now and the 4th one is coming out next year or something. This kind of a steampunk fantasy, but definitely alternate history in a world kind of almost like in a Victorian time where the Tower of Babel is real and was never destroyed. And it's about the headmaster of a school from a small fishing village who goes on a honeymoon with his young wife to the Tower of Babel, which he has been obsessed with for a long time. He thinks it's going to be an amazing adventure to go in the various ringdoms of the bottom of the tower. Just, you know, it's a tourist trap, why not? But when he arrives with his wife, they are immediately separated and he can't find his wife again. And it turns out that the Tower of Babel is a trap. It sucks people in and you can never get out. And he slowly works his way up through the first 4 levels or ringdoms of the Tower of Babel, trying to find his wife and return with her, because initially he doesn't want to return home without his wife for fear of what people will say about him. Now, the thing I didn't quite like about this book is that there's not really an end. Really the only story arc in this first volume is the character development of Thomas Senlin. He becomes a very different person by the end. He learns some very hard lessons. He loses a lot of his assumptions and book learning and naivete, and he gets some kind of hard knocks and street smarts by the end. So that's a really good character journey, but it's a very slow-paced book. It's maybe a little bit difficult to get into, and none of the major problems are solved, none of the major questions are answered by the end. So it's basically a setup novel. And if you don't care that much about Senlin as a person, I don't think it would work very well for you. I struggled with this book quite a bit. I really disliked Senlin in the first half. The slow pacing just really dragged it down for me. It picked up in the second half because he has this shift. He becomes a very different person and I liked him a lot more at that point. I still have some reservations about this though. I'm really not fond of this lost wife trope, and I feel like this book really needed some other perspectives to follow what was actually happening to Maria, the lost wife, or any of the other female characters in the book. So I have some reservations about this, but I might read the second book. I'm kind of waiting to see what some of my friends think about the second book before I pick it up, because this really could go in a number of directions, and I think I would really enjoy it if it continues to be a quest, like up the various levels of the Tower of Babel, answering some questions about what is the purpose of this structure, but also if it were to introduce some actual viewpoints of the women in the story, especially Maria. This could really go in some non-stereotypical directions, and I think I would really like it if it did that, but I might hold off a bit on reading the second book. I may give short shrift to these last two books. I'm getting a bit tired of sitting here talking to a camera. But the next book is Jane Unlimited by Kristin Cashore. This is an odd book, and I'm not sure how much I actually liked it. I have both good things and bad things to say about this. So the format is probably the oddest thing about this book. Is an introduction, a setup, and then there are 5 stories that give 5 endings to it, all based on different decisions that the main character Jane makes. So the setup is that Jane is 18 years old. She is now on her own because her Aunt Magnolia, who raised her, died recently. And one day a woman whom she is acquainted with comes into her place of work and basically says, "You should quit your job and move out of your apartment and come live with me and my family in our mansion on our private island." And Jane says, okay, because her Aunt Magnolia once made her promise that if she was ever invited to this island, she would go. She does, and there's some really crazy, strange, mysterious things happening in this mansion. And then at that point, it starts switching to different stories. As Jane makes different decisions, the stories kind of investigate one or the other of the elements or mysteries that she's noticed in the beginning, and each of the stories is a different genre. So the first one is like an art theft investigation, the second is kind of a spy thriller in some ways, the third, I believe, is the supernatural ghost story that was very reminiscent of the yellow wallpaper. I think it's actually the inspiration for that. Then there is the like pirate war in space multiverse parallel universe story, and then the last one is I almost want to call it like a surrealist story. It was kind of bizarre and fantastical. I liked the beginning. I liked the first 2 stories, which were very much about mystery investigations, and then the final 3 stories just progressively lost me more and more. The ghost story just had a feel that didn't work for me. It has this very oppressive, hazy feel to it, as like this house is crushing the people inside of it, and I was not into that feeling. The science fictional story, I should have liked that. I enjoy science fiction. It was just not a really good science fiction story. And then the final one was just kind of bizarre, and it did something with one of the characters who's actually a dog. My favorite character in the whole story. I just didn't like what it did with the dog. So, you know. What is this book's deal? It's okay. I feel like the format kind of lets it down. It was originally conceived as a choose your own adventure story, and instead it ends up in this weird compromise between that and a short story collection and a novel. And I think it might have been better if it really embraced a weird format more, if it really went there and was more highly structured. Possibly I missed out on something because I was listening to this on audiobook despite having the physical copy. The audiobook doesn't give very good indicators for when one story ends and the other begins, and basically a reset button is hit and you go back to the beginning and start over in a different way. The physical book has more like design and formatting elements that show you that you are switching to a different like decision and timeline and story. So it was harder to grasp the concept and the structure of the entire book while listening to it on audio, in my opinion. So I will end on a high note with this little review though, because there are 2 things that I quite liked about it. They're just elements though that didn't necessarily make me love the whole. The first one is that Jane is bisexual, and this is presented very matter-of-factly in the story. Her continual love interest throughout most of the stories is a woman, and this is just perfectly normal feeling. And she's also a little bit attracted to a guy in the story. I really like that. It was just a really good representation. The other thing is that I really liked the umbrellas. Jane's artistic medium is umbrellas. She makes umbrellas inspired by very not umbrella-like objects and stuff, and that was just so cool. It was such a good touch, and I'd never come across anything quite like that in a book before, so I really enjoyed that. But I just don't think it gelled very well overall for me. And the last book that I have to talk about today is probably going to be on my favorites list of the year. I just got done reading it about an hour ago, and that is this short story collection called The Cereal Garden: The Complete Armitage Family Stories by Joan Aiken. This has got to be one of my favorite short story collections of all time. I cannot remember the last time I read a collection where I liked or loved every single story. I think the last one was probably Young Woman in a Garden by Delia Sherman, and that was years ago. So this is a collection of children's stories, and it is the adventures, magical, kooky stuff that happens to the Armitage family, which are the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Armitage, and their children, Harriet and Mark. And it's just really matter-of-fact magical things that happen. Like, it's completely normal for a unicorn to show up in your back garden and for you to adopt it as a pet, or for half the old ladies in the village to be witches. And just, yeah, this is like harkens back to an era where children had so much more freedom to go off and play and do whatever they wanted to. It's very nostalgic in that way. They're just delightful and sweet and not too perfect. A thing I kind of want to emphasize is that while most of these are very, let's call them wholesome stories, there are some that are kind of bittersweet. There are a couple of stories where death actually appears, and they're probably better because they're a little bit imperfect. They're not completely wonderful feeling. These stories remind me so much of some of the novels and short stories I read as a kid. Probably things like E. Nesbit's work, actually, now that I think about it. It's been a very long time since I read Nesbit's work, but this seems similar to me. So, I don't know, just everything about this I like. I don't have anything bad to say about it at all. And they're just great. I need to come up with something more intelligent to say about this. It was just a really good reading experience, and I would like more. No matter what I do, I can't avoid the sound of the leaf blower. I hope you can't hear that. It's driving me crazy at this point. It's been going on for like 3 hours straight now. Oh my goodness, they have a lot of leaves across the street. But that is everything that I read in the second half of December. I'm sure I'll finish another maybe 2 things by the end of the year, but that will have to be included in my next wrap up in January. So let me know if you have read any of these books, or if you want to, leave me your comments down below. I will try to reply to comments more quickly now that I'm back home. I didn't have internet for a couple of days, guys. But I will be back to talk to you again pretty darn soon, and until then, bye.